Have you ever wondered what true world peace would look like? Well, today we're diving into a 2,700-year-old prophecy that paints an incredible picture of just that. We're going to unpack Isaiah chapter 2, verse by verse, and see what it has to say.
So, we're talking about a powerful vision of global transformation from the book of Isaiah. For literally thousands of years, this ancient prophecy has given people this radical hope for a world completely free of war.
Okay, let's kick things off right at the beginning. Verse 1 sets the stage for everything that's about to unfold. Right out of the gate, this verse tells us the key players. The who is Isaiah, the prophet, and the what is a vision specifically about Judah and its capital, Jerusalem. So that's our anchor point, our ground zero for this whole prophecy. Now we get to verse 2, and this is where the core of this incredible vision really starts to take shape.
So Isaiah sees a time when the temple in Jerusalem, the Lord's house on Mount Moriah, is going to be spiritually lifted up, becoming this beacon that draws every nation on earth to it. It's a vision of Jerusalem becoming the spiritual center of the world.
Now that phrase, the last days, is absolutely key, but its meaning is a little more complex than you might think. It doesn't necessarily mean the literal end of the world. You know, when you look at the original Hebrew, it points to a more general future time, sort of an era to come. The prophets often used this phrase when they were talking about the period they were really waiting for, the age of the Messiah.
And here's where it gets really interesting. This prophecy has been seen as having multiple layers of fulfillment throughout history. People have pointed to the rebuilding of the temple after the Babylonian exile, to that grand temple that stood in Jesus' time, and yeah, even to a future period that some believe is still on the horizon.
And this isn't just an Old Testament thing. Fast forward to the New Testament, and you see the Apostle Peter using the exact same kind of prophetic language to describe what was happening in his own time.
This is such a perfect example of how the early Christians saw their world. For them, the time of Christ and the apostles was a fulfillment of these last days prophecies. They truly believed they were living in that future that had been promised for so long.
So what happens when Jerusalem is lifted up like this? Well, verse 3 shows us just how big of an impact it has on the rest of the world.
The vision just gets bigger. People from all over the globe aren't just going to be drawn to Jerusalem, they'll actually be encouraging each other saying, hey, let's go. They want to learn God's ways. Jerusalem becomes the source of divine law and teaching for all of humanity.
And you know, history actually backs this up. Jerusalem really was the religious and educational heart of Judaism. People traveled there for huge festivals, families brought their babies to be presented at the temple, and it was a top-tier center for learning. I mean, famous figures like the Apostle Paul were educated there.
All right, now we get to verse 4. And this verse contains one of the most powerful, most iconic images of peace you will find anywhere in literature, period. This is just a staggering vision. I mean, really stop and think about what this is saying. It's not just a ceasefire. This is the complete and total eradication of war from the human experience. It's total disarmament, where not only the tools but the very idea of conflict is gone for good. And look at the symbolism here. The prophecy isn't just about destroying weapons, it's about transforming them. What a profound idea that the very same energy, the same steel, the same human creativity used for destruction can be completely repurposed for creation. Instruments of death are literally reshaped into tools of life. Conflict becomes cultivation.
Which, of course, brings us to a huge point of interpretation. Because as beautiful as this vision is, this part of the prophecy is famously, well, unfulfilled.
And because of that, a lot of scholars and theologians call this millennial language. They see it as a prophecy that's pointing to a distant future age of peace, a millennium that's going to require another future restoration before it can truly come to pass. And of course, interpretations of what that future looks like can vary. For instance, the Latter-day Saint tradition sees a kind of dual fulfillment. They envision two world capitals in this future age of peace, the original, historic Jerusalem, and also a new Jerusalem on the American continent. So, after this huge, sweeping vision of a far-off future, the prophecy does something really interesting. It pivots and ends with a personal, immediate invitation. You see how the focus just snaps back? The vision comes all the way back from the distant future, from all the nations of the world, and lands right back on Isaiah's immediate audience, the house of Jacob. He's calling on them to make a choice right here, right now.
So basically, after showing them this incredible vision of a peaceful future, the prophet says, okay, let's start walking that path today. The promise of future peace becomes a call to action in the present.
And that really leaves us with the final thought to chew on. How can a 2,700-year-old vision of a world without war guide not just nations, but our own individual actions today?